The Detroit Pistons made a trade this morning, netting themselves Tim Hardaway Jr. and 3 future second-round picks for the services of Quentin Grimes. We'll talk about that trade as well as some of the candidates that we should be keeping an eye on for free agency in just a moment.
Lane, skies a jam. Dynamite dunk and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_3on3. You can also follow us over on Instagram at Pistons_Intellect. As always, if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. Man, I thought today I was just going to be, as I said on yesterday's episode, jumping on to go through some free agency names to keep an eye on, which we still will do today. But overnight, and for me in Australia, in the very early hours of this morning, the Pistons made a trade which had been rumored to happen a few days ago, and it came to fruition. And that trade was for Tim Hardaway Jr., as I mentioned off the top. Trajan Langdon makes his second trade in charge of the Pistons. And as you can see here, the Pistons traded Quentin Grimes for Tim Hardaway Jr. and 3 second-round picks per Woj. Now, a lot of the time, one thing I'm never going to be able to do while I live in Australia is report on breaking news in the NBA due to the time zone. And that's something that kind of frustrates me a little bit when I'm always waking up to these trades. This trade would have happened at like 2 a.m. in the morning for me here in Australia. But sometimes I'm a bit frustrated because I'm late to the news. But in this instance, I'm actually kind of happy that I wasn't able to react to this live, because I feel like after thinking about this all day, I'm recording this at 5 p.m. So I wake up at this morning I woke up like 6:30. So the trade had been out for about 4 hours. And when I first saw it, I was a bit like, I was hoping the Pistons could get a first back for Quentin Grimes. But I did state in my tweet the other day that maybe I was just being too protective of a player in Quentin Grimes who played 6 games for the Pistons. And maybe I was holding on a little bit too much to one kind of good season he had with the Knicks prior to last. But I still value Quentin Grimes quite highly, but clearly the NBA doesn't value him as highly as I thought, because apparently there were other offers out there for Grimes. But, I saw funnily on Twitter someone say, in response to a Pistons fan being like, I hope this was the best offer, I saw someone respond, sarcastically, no, Trajan would just take the second best offer. So it feels like this probably was the best offer out there. Now, obviously that's up to interpretation. We don't know the other deals, but look, I think now that the dust has settled, I'm kind of, and I've actually done a bit of a dive onto to Tim Hardaway Jr. I think I'm actually okay with this deal. Tim Hardaway Jr. is 32 years old. The Pistons are getting him on his final year of his deal, which is worth $16 million. He's a wing, shooting guard, small forward, and his career numbers and last season were pretty much the same, where he averaged 14 points, 42% field goal, 36% from 3 on just under 8 attempts a game. So that 42% field goal is probably not the most accurate stat because so many of his shots come from beyond the arc, but shot 38% from the corners, 37% on pull-up threes on 2 attempts a game, 40% on open threes on 2 of those a game, and overall, like I said, around 36% from 3 on high volume. So those numbers, even if those are impressive numbers to me, but they might seem a bit lower than what you would consider an elite shooter because of the volume he takes in that. Like Tim Hardaway Jr. can shoot the ball. I think where the issue with Hardaway Jr. comes from is pretty much all he does is shoot and score. He doesn't really give you much else. And I had a chat to Mavs content creator on YouTube. His name's Slightly Biased, on Twitter as well. Huge Mavs fan and an awesome content creator. I just DM'd him on Twitter and I just asked him to give me a brief rundown of the Tim Hardaway Jr. experience. And I think this is going to leave some fans not feeling great, but I just think this was a pretty good assessment of his game. So slightly biased, he said, I mean, when he's hot, it doesn't matter where he's at, how good the contest is, how deep it is, he's shooting, and it's probably going in. His cold stretches, though, are absolutely brutal, and he was on a 4-month cold stretch to end last season. He's a bad defender, bad playmaker, some on-ball creation moments, but ultimately just want him to space the floor and bomb threes. So, as I kind of said, he's not going to give you much apart from spacing, shooting, and scoring from the perimeter. But I think the fact that he's on a 1-year expiring deal, adds more value to this move. The Pistons get 3 second-rounders back, which maybe if they are taking on another bad contract this summer, they can get that player as well as send back a couple of seconds and maybe net back a couple more firsts. You never know. It just gives the Pistons some more second-round draft picks to play with. Look, like I said, 3 second-round picks, if you're just looking at this in the sense of, okay, they're going to use those 3 second-round picks to draft players, clearly that's not very exciting. But the more picks you can stack, the more flexibility and leverage you can have in deals. So I believe one of those second-round picks is a Toronto pick as well, and the direction that franchise is going in is still kind of unclear. So overall, look, my final thoughts are I'm not giving this. I think overall, I should say, I'm going to, and this is why I haven't even tweeted about the trade, and this is my first time sharing thoughts. I'm just going to wait like at least a week before I really start, putting hard line grades or opinions on what Langdon's doing, because I think it's kind of clear the Pistons next season aren't going to be great. I think if they are going to be near that plane, it's going to come from potentially young players developing at a faster rate than expected, or Cade Cunningham just turning into an all-NBA type talent. But I think I'm still just going to wait to hold judgment, because if Tim Hardaway Jr. is starting opening night, I don't think that's a bad thing, but I would like to think he's not starting just with like 3 or 4 young players. That's where the issue will be. If Tim Hardaway's starting and the Pistons have an established veteran, who I'll get into some of them in the next segment, they have an established veteran like a Tobias Harris at the 4, they have a Sarr at the 3, and they find some stretch big at the 5 or a really good rim protection big at the 5, then that's okay to me, because he's going to provide extremely good spacing. Like, even when he goes through these cold stretches, I think one thing he will provide, or one thing you can count, is that teams will defend him as if he's shooting the ball really well. Like Tim Hardaway Jr., you never leave him open, and he creates space and draws defenders off the ball. So look, like I said, grade, I've warmed to this. I'm not giving this an F or an A or going crazy. I think it's just a solid move, and we'll find out more once the dust settles and once we see where this roster is in a week or 2 time. But let me know your thoughts on the trade. I think immediately a lot of Pistons fans were quick to jump on it and say it sucked. But I think over some time, maybe fans will become a bit more level-headed and might see this trade in a different light. Maybe it just is a bad move. I guess we'll find out in time. But I'd like to know your thoughts for sure in the comments, so let me know. But that kind of brings me to the next segment, and that's kind of just an update on free agency and free agents to watch across the next few days, because in less than 48 hours, free agency opens, where teams can start negotiating deals. I believe if you're living on the East Coast of the US, at 6 p.m. on Sunday. For people here in Australia, that is probably around 6 a.m. on Monday. So we are very close to seeing what this team's going to look like, because we all know the first day, 2 days, maybe third day is when a lot of these deals get done of free agency. So I would dare say this time next week, the Pistons roster will be pretty set. So I'm excited. I'm nervous. I think I'm very happy with the decision so far in terms of completely cleaning house with the front office and bringing in 4 or 5 new minds. I've loved that. The draft I was pretty happy with, but this piece right here now is going to determine a lot about how we feel about this team next season and in the future. And I will get to the coach in a minute, but I think where we could start with the free agency update is the Pistons, obviously following that trade and taking on Tim Hardaway Jr.'s salary, they now have the second most cap space in the league. They have a projected $51 million in cap space. They also declined Evan Fournier's option today, which was expected. So he will definitely not be with the team next season, and he will not be used as a trade. So with that $51 million, here are some of the names that, and I took some of these names from James Edwards III's piece from The Athletic today. Go check that out. But these are some of the names the Pistons could, and some of them they should definitely go after. The first one, I spoke about this yesterday a little bit, but that's Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. It feels like he's definitely out from the Nuggets. Doesn't feel like they're going to be able to retain him. And he's a guy that he's 31 years old. He's shot 38% from three or better in his past 5 seasons. He's a solid to good defender, really good on ball. He gets in the passing lanes, can get steals, deflections, that kind of thing. He's a little bit slant, like he's not like the biggest, so I think he's more going to take the opposing team's best guard or their shooting guard as opposed to wings. But he's like 6'6", so he's a guy that can provide some wing defense on smaller wings. James said in his article, Kentavious is probably looking to get around 25 to 27 million a season. He posted, I think off the top of my head, he said a deal he could see being like 3 years. I think it was like 3 years 70 to come to the Pistons, something like that. Or maybe it was 3 years 70 with the team option on the last. I think I would be okay with that. It's like, I think KCP is a proven, consistent 3-and-D guard, I would say. I think if they invest this much in KCP, as well as having someone like Hardaway Jr., I would dare say Jaden Ivey probably's future with this team is over. And even if that might sound a bit silly, I just can't see you having Cade, Ivy, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and Tim Hardaway Jr., all players who are going to play in the backcourt, as well as maybe a Marcus Sasser. I just feel like, forget about Sasser, I just feel like there's not really a pathway there for Jaden to play the amount of minutes you'd want him to play to develop. I'm not saying he needs to play 36 minutes, but I just would think if you're investing this much into KCP over the next 3 years, he's probably starting, and I just don't really see a pathway there for Jaden Ivey. So I'm open to moving Ivy. I'm pretty much open to moving any of the Pistons apart from Cade and the new rookies, because I just don't see them being moved at all. So those are my thoughts on KCP. I just can't see him coming to Detroit, because I feel like another team will be able to pay him something like that. And he's just come from winning an NBA championship. He won a championship with the Lakers. Like, I just don't really see him coming back to the worst team in the league for maybe $5 million extra, $10 million extra overall. But it's a name worth discussing for sure. And the next player, I think, which this one could happen for sure. This one I feel like is, there's a lot of ties here, and that's with Najee Marshall from the New Orleans Pelicans. He's a 26-year-old wing. I think he's around 6'7". Definitely 3-and-D potential, really good defender. And last year, what's really piqued a lot of people's interest with him is his ability to improve his jumper, and he shot 38% from deep last year. Now, prior to that, in the 3 seasons prior, he shot a combined 28% from three on around 2.5 attempts. So great defender, great size. I'm not sure if he's a starting caliber wing in the future. He's already 26 years old. So he's obviously about to hit his prime. But I'm just not sure how much more growth he has as a player. And the only thing that concerns me, and particularly I've always liked the idea of Marshall, but since the Pistons draft, in them taking Ron Holland, who is a non-shooter right now, and with how their roster currently looks with some young guys, I'm just not sure I want to prioritize Marshall as much as I did prior to the draft, because I still all he's had is one good season from three, shooting 38%. And I know the Pistons have Fred Vincent, who was his shooting coach at New Orleans. But I think I would rather, unless you can get him for, like James Edwards here puts 10 to 14 million, which I think is around the mid-level, which maybe that's fine. But I'm just not as in on Marshall as I was prior, because the Pistons so desperately need shooting. And I'm just not sure I want to invest in a guy who's not anywhere near close to a proven shooter. He's still very much a work in progress. Like that 38% wasn't on the highest of volume. I reckon it was like 3.5 attempts a game. So, but he has all the size and tools to be a really good wing. And he really came on for the Pelicans towards the end of the season. So, yeah, not out on it. I guess I'm just not as hot as I was on Marshall as I was pre-draft. So the next player to keep an eye on is Isaiah Hartenstein. We've spoken about him a lot here as Pistons fans. I think Nick Claxton for a long time was the guy in the Pistons community being discussed, because it felt like Hartenstein was either going back to the Knicks or going somewhere like OKC. But with how things have shaken out in the past couple of days, with Claxton re-signing for 4 years, $100 million, with the Thunder, and obviously the trade that the Knicks made for Mikal Bridges, it feels like Hartenstein is now probably not going back to the Knicks. And based off what Nick Claxton got, he's probably looking now at the similar deal, if not more. So I'm not sure whether the Thunder would want to pay him between 25 to 30 million annually. To be honest, I'm not sure if I want to as a Pistons fan, but he's definitely a guy that is back on the table now for the Pistons. And I could see a real possibility of him coming to Detroit. I think he's like 26 years old, so he still has a ton of good basketball left in him. I could see maybe a young Pistons team potentially appealing to him, but time will say. 25 million for Hartenstein, for a guy that hasn't really been. He was very good in the playoffs, and when Mitch Robinson was out this season, he was a really good starting big man in the league. I'm just not sure I want to invest. Like, if this is 4 years, 120 million, which is 30 million annually, I think that's too much. I would be getting a bit nervous about that deal. But yeah, if you get in 4 years, 100, maybe that's not as bad. Maybe I'd be okay with that. Because I think whilst he's not an amazing rim protector, he's a really good defender, good rebounder, great passer, great pick and roll partner for Cade. And yeah, I think him and Isaiah Stewart as your two centers could be a really good tandem in what they offer together. So, because I assume if you get Hartenstein for a deal this big, maybe the Pistons just bring on Jalen Duren a lot slower at the backup position, but just doesn't make as much sense. I would feel more comfortable having Isaiah Stewart as your backup 4-5. Excuse me. So on to some other names here. Tobias Harris. Spoken about him a lot. I don't think I need to go into him too much. I would like to discuss James Edwards put out in his article that he could see Tobias coming to the Pistons for 2 years, $50 million. We've discussed that here. I think that's the deal Pistons fans should focus on, because I would like to think the front office isn't going to offer him like 4 years, $160 million or something crazy. If Tobias is a Piston, it's because he's signing a more front-ended, or a $50 million, $60 million deal on 2 years, more short-term, which makes a lot more sense. I've spoken about it heaps here. Shooting, scoring, just overall production, 6 rebounds a game, career high, 4 assists this last season. He's 36% from three, close to 50% from the field, and a really good free throw shooter. And he just has good size on the defensive end, even if he struggles there. So I think he's probably, honestly, when I look at these free agency lists, in terms of who is a realistic target for the Pistons, Tobias Harris is probably at the top of my list. Just because of the production, the position he plays, as well as kind of the contract that Detroit could sign him to. I think he would really help this team next season. So the last couple of names, I'll be quick here. It was Malik Beasley. He's, never going to be a great defender on the wing, but he is around 6'7", 6'8", I believe. He shot 42% from 3 on 7 attempts per game. There's a lot of crossover between him and Tim Hardaway Jr., so I don't think he would be very high on the priority list anymore. But yeah, I think he's roughly, I want to say he's around 27, 28 years old. So a bit younger than Hardaway Jr. for sure, but there's a lot of overlap there. And considering Beasley doesn't bring you a lot defensively, it would be probably a bit of a tough pill to swallow having two of those kind of volume three-point shooters that don't give you a whole heap on the defensive end. That would remind me a whole lot of Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. But a name worth mentioning for sure. And then Jalen Smith was another guy I wanted to mention who today opted out of his contract and will be an unrestricted free agent. He was with the Pacers last season. He's 6'11". He's more of like a true four-man, but can play minutes at the center. He's probably just a bit thin to be there. But 10.6 boards, 42% from three, true stretch big. Can give you a little bit of rim protection, but overall defensively just probably doesn't have the size, even though he's like 6'10". But he could be that spacing big if the Pistons, particularly if the Pistons trade Isaiah Stewart. If Stewart was to end up somewhere like OKC, not sure what that deal would look like, but say he did, Jalen Smith could come in and he could be that stretch big for Detroit. And I'm not sure he's going to cost you a heap either. So, and for Smith, a team like the Pistons would, and this goes for Najee Marshall as well, a team like the Pistons would appeal to them because they're still guys who are trying to fully find their way in the league in terms of, potentially being a starter maybe. And, a younger team like the Pistons would definitely not be short of opportunity for them. So kind of could see that being a fit. Now, I wanted to bring up a couple of trade candidates from the Hawks because the Hawks today made a huge trade they traded away DeJounte Murray for a whole heap of future assets to the Pelicans. And the reason I want to bring it up is the names I'm going to discuss here aren't new. We've spoken about Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter a heap. And I want to bring up Capella again because I think in light of missing out on Claxton and now looking at the potential price tag of Hartenstein, if Isaiah Hartenstein's going to be getting $28 million a year annually, I think the Pistons might be better just trying to get Clint Capella, taking him off the hands of the Hawks, getting his $22 million expiring, and just using him for rim protection this season. And then once again, looking for that rim protecting big. Maybe next draft, you're able to get, maybe next draft you're able to get the stretch big or this elite rim protector, or maybe you're able to trade. Who knows? But if the Pistons strike out in free agency and it just doesn't match, I think Capella is kind of like a low risk get they could bring in at the center position. Someone who's going to block some shots, rebound, and be that role man. So wanted to bring him up. And then also DeAndre Hunter. He has 3 years, $68 million expiring. Could the Pistons flip some of those second rounders they got today, send them out to the Hawks and get Hunter and maybe a late first back? And they eat his it's around $22 million salary per year. You just slot that into that $50 million cap space. Well, maybe there's a player the Hawks want. Maybe Jalen Duren, you ship him out. And you might get more picks back with Hunter. Who knows? Not saying that's something I would do. It's just something to think about. Maybe the Hawks will be really interested in Jaden Ivey if they move on from Trae Young. So I think the Hawks are a team to watch for sure. So I'll be definitely keeping my eye on them. But a whole lot of free agency stuff there I've just discussed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And before we get out of here, I just wanted to do a quick coaching update. So today, let me bring this up here. So Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report today reported that James Borrego has removed his name from the Pistons coaching search. So Borrego, by the sounds of it, is officially out. Who knows? I believe he did interview with the team, but who knows if he was ever going to get it. I feel like if he interviewed and then just pulled his name out, maybe that was a nice PR spin, or putting a nice PR spin on not getting the job per se. But yeah, he's out. I wasn't all in on him by any stretch. I'm very open to all the candidates, but yeah, he's out. I spoke about kind of maybe him and the benefits he could have on this team a couple episodes ago, but none of that matters anymore. And then the names that are in the mix and that could replace Monty, James mentioned them in his article today, and that's Sean Sweeney, who's an assistant with Dallas. He's interviewed Micah Nori from the Timberwolves. He's interviewed for the job, and JB Bickerstaff, the former Cavs coach, he's also interviewed. So Bickerstaff, I'm really not that high on. I'm not saying it's not because I think he'd be a horrible coach, I think I'm more leaning towards a new first-time head coach, someone like Sweeney, Nori, or I would love if Chris Quinn got in on these interviews because he's been under Coach Spo for like 10 years. But someone like that who's paid their dues as an assistant with successful programs in particular, who Nori, Sweeney, and Quinn all have, that to me, those type of candidates are what I would be super interested in. I hope one of them lands the job. So that's what I've got on the coaching front. But as I said, I think the next time I speak, we will have seen some moves made in free agency. I'm planning to do an episode immediately after day one of free agency, and I'll get that out to you guys as quick as possible. But unless there's any breaking news tomorrow, which who knows, there could be another trade coming. We'll see. Unless there's any breaking news tomorrow, I'll be back to recap day one of free agency, which I feel like we're going to have a whole heap of stuff going on. So I hope it's good. I hope we're going to be celebrating something. But until then, as always, go Pistons.